Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. On tonight's show, we'll have a story from Inside Energy. But first, Matt O'Lean gets a chance to talk with former Grand Forks Herald editor Mike Jacobs.
Coming up later on Prairie Pulse, we'll have an Inside Energy story from Emily Guerin. But first, our guest is former Grand Forks Herald editor Mike Jacobs, who has a new book out. Mike, thanks for joining us.
You bet. I'm pleased to be here.
First off, I know your background, but tell people where you're from originally, your background, how you got into journalism.
I'm from Montrose County. I was born and raised at Stanley. I graduated from high school there, went off to the university. From there, I wandered around a bit and came back to North Dakota in 1971 to work at the Dickinson Press. And I published a little newspaper called The Onlooker for a while. I've resurrected that title for a column in Forum Company newspapers, including the Herald, about politics and the legislature and the state in general. And I was 35 years at the Herald and retired, and I now describe myself as a gentleman gardener.
Very good. Well, you did such great work at the Herald.
Oh,
I went to UND, and I remember those were the glory days of the Herald, you know, covering the flood and things like that. What are some of your proudest moments?
Well, proud moments. You know, the thing I'm proudest of, honestly, is all of the great people who came through the Herald newsroom. We produced a lot of editors, a lot of reporters for American journalism, and that's what I'm proudest of. The greatest joy, of course, is going into the office and holding that gold medal for the Pulitzer. But that was a gift of the river. You training those people and sending those people out into American journalism is I think an accomplishment of the staff, and I'm very proud of those people.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your new book,
right?
A Birthday Inquiry, North Dakota at 125, and this is an online book, right? Is that what we call it? That's a collection of essays. Tell us about it.
Well, it's an experiment. You know, the newspaper business has been through the ringer, I guess is what we would say. And the nature of reporting has changed dramatically.
Yes, it has.
And so what I imagined was that it would be possible to do long-form journalism, longish. I mean, this is not a long book. It's about 22,000 words, you know, an afternoon's read, an easy afternoon's read. But I wanted to be able to bring together, you know, salient information and then try to put it in some kind of context, the context of the state's history and what's going on elsewhere in the world, and then just push it out there as a way to say, here's where we are at 125 years. So I mean, it certainly could have been published as a book. There are lots of reasons not to do that, you know, expense being, being the big one. But really, the critical one is time. Journalism does not lend itself to book publishing. And we need to find a way to do this kind of journalism and get it turned over more quickly. And so this is an experiment in that regard. And I'm hoping that I'll have the energy to do some more of these. I'm pretty seriously toying with a piece on higher education in North Dakota. I have a deadline in my head. I'm way behind. It's a monstrously complex issue, so I'm not making any promises about it. But that's the sort of thing. I mean, an issue arises, you go in and have a quick look, and get something out there, and then move on to the next thing. So it's journalism. It's not literature.
Yeah. I'll have you recap at the end how people can get the book.
Absolutely.
But Amazon, right?
Amazon.
Tell us how they can get it.
Right. Yeah, it's a $6 download at Amazon.com.
Okay, very good. You write a lot about oil boom, politics in these essays, the history and the politics, so many interesting subjects. Just what are your thoughts on some of those things? Because I know you're critical of some of the things that might be going on too.
Well, yeah, I suppose critical is the right word. I try not to be too critical because it's such an extraordinary circumstance.
Yes.
And so none of us know how to do it. I'm more concerned, I think, than critical.
Right.
I think that we need to, and one of the reasons, frankly, for doing this experiment, this kind of collection of essays, is to try to lay out what the things that might be possible are. I mean, we are, whether we like it or not, oil is here, and we are now an important player on the world stage in the oil market and in the whole energy picture, and that's inescapable. And so what we need to do is understand what the culture of the state has been, what our aspirations might be, and how we can make this boom more comfortable, for lack of a better term, for us and for the people who are going to be coming here. I mean, there are going to be many more of us in the immediate future than there were 5 or 10 years ago, or even than there are today. I think despite the lower oil prices at the moment.
And you do have that sometimes uncomfortable mix of new people coming into the
Right.
state. And as you know, Mike, you and I both grew up here. Sometimes outsiders aren't completely welcome in North Dakota.
Yeah, more than sometimes, I'd
Yeah,
say.
I think you're right. So there's that uncomfortable mix out there of out there where we're recording this in Bismarck, right here,
Right.
of new people coming into the state.
It's an odd thing, actually, because for so much of the state's history, and this plays into the higher education drama, for so much of the state's history, our leading export was young people. And we pushed out well-educated, well-trained young people. And now we need those people, we need those kinds of people to come here. But we don't have a whole lot of experience in welcoming people, designing the kinds of things that they want. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at some of the things that are happening in my hometown. Things that you just would never have imagined. I describe Stanley as sort of, it's the same old Last Picture Show town when you're downtown. The same old farts crossing the street from the bar to the barber shop, the same tumbleweeds growing across the street, as it was in the bad old days when nothing was going on. And then you go out to the highway and it's like Tatooine in Star Wars.
Yes,
There's
yes.
this incredible
Mordor.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And Stanley is well past the real cut of the boom. I mean, it was the first town impacted. But you go to Watford City, and it's even, there you can barely cross the street. So it's really quite astonishing. And all of these people, they're coming from all over the world, really, and they're coming into a place that is, for a very long time has not had that kind of an influx of people.
You're right about the dominant Republican Party in the
Right,
state
the one-party
too,
state.
and how that can get a little dangerous. And maybe the New York Times piece kind of got into this as
Yeah.
well, with the uncomfortable 3 people on the Industrial Commission with a lot of power. Talk about that a little bit, Mike.
Well, North Dakota has never had so long a period of time when one party had essentially complete control of the government. There have been fairly long stretches. We think about the Guy Link years in the 60s and 70s, but we're past that length of time now. And of course, Bill Guy never had a very friendly legislature. He managed to have a majority one year. Art Link did maybe a little bit better, but there's never been a situation where there's been this kind of sort of monolithic government. And I think that it's something to be aware of and something to watch. I think that I was around in the Bill Guy years, and Bill Guy was sort of a figure above it all, but there was a lot of cronyism in the administration. Here we see, kind of I don't want to say pervasive cronyism exactly, but there's just a very tight relationship between the government and both the ag and oil industries, and so it's just a little bit. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying I'm a little concerned about it.
Can you read a couple?
Sure.
You brought your laptop.
I did.
Some excerpts.
It's an ebook, so we sort of want to be up to date here,
Yes.
don't we? I actually don't have a paper copy. I suppose I could print one out, but
You had a
too
couple
much
things
static
marked, I know,
electricity.
to
Yeah.
read here.
Yeah, I gotta get them all called up. So this is toward the end of the book when I'm kind of reflecting on what's happened here. The book keys off of the opening of the Heritage Center on the 125th anniversary of statehood, which of course was the 2nd of November. So here's a couple of pieces from the concluding essay. In some ways, nothing is different now that North Dakota is 125 years old. In some ways, nothing is the same. And within that paradox lies an emerging identity. Here's what's the same. The economy is commodity-based. Raw materials are shipped away for processing. Capital comes from elsewhere. Wealth follows the commodity out of the state. What's different is profound. Oil is a high-value commodity, vastly more than any of the agricultural crops that North Dakota raised. That changes the equation. Oil wealth is not just greater, it is distributed differently. Importantly, it is distributed differentially too. Agriculture is egalitarian, oil is stratified. Finally, the government takes a far larger share of oil wealth than it does of agricultural wealth. North Dakota is rich.
You had another one here.
Sort of that's
Yeah.
sort of where we are.
Yep.
Now I want to maybe talk about where we might be going.
Okay.
I'm going to scroll down here. I like this piece. I'm going to do this. This is maybe the best turned phrase.
Okay, good. It's always nice.
Yeah.
I write film reviews, and I know when you get one, you just
You
love
want
it.
you kind of
Yes.
savor it.
Yes.
Now, I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting in the right spot
Okay.
here. Just hang on. The scale is different, and so is the attitude. North Dakota NICE has developed an edge. Probably this should be expected from a state and a people who've been undervalued and who've undervalued themselves for so long. This more belligerent attitude is both new and unnerving, as if the chip on the shoulder has become a club in the hand.
Very good. Very good.
So there you go. That's a couple of pieces.
I mentioned the New York Times piece,
Mm-hmm.
which, a lot of people reacted strongly
Mm-hmm.
to that. Do you think the North Dakota media has been derelict in their duties covering this, or did the Times just have more resources to come out here and start turning over some stones that maybe were uncomfortable for people to turn over?
Well, there's a two-part answer.
Okay.
One is there's no question that the North Dakota media is less robust than it was, and that's true all over the country. I think that the North Dakota media does a very good job on the day-to-day
Yes.
kinds of things, and there are instances of really very good depth reporting. The trafficking series that Forum Communications did, I thought, was a very good example of you going out, chasing the story, and coming back with something that people said, whoa. Now, that being said, the New York Times has vastly more resources. And what the New York Times also has is a different view. I mean, they're looking at this from a different spot. And so they're not dealing with the day-to-day kinds of things that the North Dakota media is dealing with. And I think pretty well. I mean, we're not lacking for reporting on saltwater spills or oil spills or oil well explosions or whatever. The difference is that the Times had the resources to put it all together. And the other difference is that the Times had the luxury, shall we say, of not being here,
Not having to live here.
not having to live
Right.
here, not having to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. A friend of mine in Grand Forks called me 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, "What does the New York Times have in for North Dakota?" And I don't rule out that there's somebody at the Times who had a bad experience driving on I-29 or I-94 across the state, had a flat tire or something on a cold day. Don't rule that out. But they had run an editorial in which attacked the Grand Forks Air Force Base as being a waste of money. And so this fellow in Grand Forks said, here they did this really nasty, in-depth report about oil field regulation, and now they're taking after the Air Force Base. What is it that they have against us? Well, I don't think anything other than that, other than somebody is seeing the state differently than we see it. Get used to it. I mean, that's
The spotlight.
yeah,
Right.
that's the spotlight. It's going to be that way. Before we were always unhappy because the National Geographic. I write about this in the essays. National Geographic comes out here and takes these ridiculous pictures, of a North Dakota that we all knew was dead and buried and gone and not forgotten, and not there was grief about it, but we were past that, and so. We just have to understand that we're in a different spot now than we've ever been before.
You had another essay, Mike, concerned about schools and the
Right.
future of schools. Tell us about that.
Well, I have to give credit where credit is due. There's a fellow, native North Dakotan named Dale Schmidt, who's a retired and lives in California and reads North Dakota papers. and puts out a newsletter every week. And it was he who brought to my attention the gradual decline in North Dakota's performance on the national measures of educational achievement. And so when I wrote the first essay after the Heritage Center opened, I mean, it's really, happy birthday, now let's gloat, it's called. And so the next one is, okay, so we're gloating now, what is there to worry about? And one of the things that I think we need to worry about that we haven't been quite aware of is the quality of the schools. And so I did a little bit of work on trying to place North Dakota on these national standards. It's a muddle, because not everybody is. This is what Common Core is all about. Common Core establishes a nationwide matrix that you can judge yourself against, for better or worse. I think for better, but I'm afraid that what we're going to discover is that we're not as good as we thought we were, and we're nowhere nearly as good as we were when you and I went to school in North Dakota. I got a first-rate education at Stanley, North Dakota. I'm deeply grateful, but I'm afraid that kids now are not getting quite that quality of education in our public schools.
What's been the reaction to your book so far, Mike? Have you had some feedback?
Well, it's not a bestseller. No. But
it's a good read. I can tell people that.
We didn't expect that. I've most of the reaction I've gotten is positive, but I think that's because only my friends have bought it. I must say I'm happy with it. I'm pleased with it. We learned a lot doing this. It's not as easy as writing something and slapping it out there. We were trying to avoid all of that production that goes into a printed book, but there's a lot of production that goes into the ebook as well. And we had any number of crises about just getting the thing produced. And there, every time I look at it, I blanch again because there are things that we didn't quite catch. So I found one last night when I was looking for stuff to read today. So we learned a lot about that. The other thing we learned, and this is really, really critical, and I think almost a bigger challenge than anything, and that is how do you get this out to people? Right. A printed book you can put on a shelf in a bookstore, and there's people will come in and discover it serendipitously. Exactly. So it's an experiment, and for a start, I think it's I'm satisfied.
Well, I loved it. You're a great writer, Mike. You always have been. So I really encourage people to download this. Tell them again how they can get it.
It's at Amazon.com. It's a $6 download. I have it here on my pad. I've got it here on my laptop. So you can get it in on any device that you can download into.
Thank you, Mike, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Our guest, Mike Jacobs. His book is A Birthday Inquiry, North Dakota at 125. Stay tuned for more.
Falling oil prices are great news for consumers. But what does it mean for the oil producers in this country? How low does the price have to get before it perils the boom? And who is being squeezed by the price slide? In the Bakken, one of the nation's biggest oil plays, producers drilling in areas where population is marginal are seeing profits plummet.
Drive around western North Dakota and you'll see a lot of these drilling rigs. There's over 150 of them in the state, all drilling new oil wells into North Dakota's Bakken Shale. 6 months ago, there were a lot more. Oil prices have dropped since then, so companies are cutting back on expenses. That means drilling fewer wells. North Dakota is already an expensive place to drill for oil. Transportation costs are higher here than in places closer to Gulf Coast refineries, $10 per barrel or more. So the drop in prices makes things even harder for companies drilling in the Bakken. With oil prices in free fall, companies like Emerald Oil are suddenly cautious. It's a small company based in Denver with just 50 wells, not much by oil field standards. CEO McAndrew Rudisil says he's drilling fewer wells next year.
No one wants to lose money drilling an oil well. So everyone is going to pull back because of where oil price is right now.
Niles Hushka is the CEO of a large engineering firm based in Bismarck, North Dakota. He says companies of all sizes are starting to feel the slowdown.
Almost on a weekly basis, there's some new announcement of companies either cutting back on their number of rigs that they have or possibly redeploying those rigs into more highly productive zones.
Hushka has seen plenty of booms and busts before in his 30-plus years as an engineer, but he says this one is harder to predict.
The interesting thing about this particular cost cycle is that it's not supply or demand driven, and that the entire price of oil today is being politically influenced. And therefore, you can't look at a traditional economic model and say supply equals demand and therefore prices should go up or down.
What he means is North American producers are pumping so much oil out of the ground, there's a glut. And OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, isn't cutting back on their production. So prices are plummeting. Here in North Dakota, oil touches everything. So people are nervous. Falling oil prices could have a huge impact. The slowdown isn't just affecting oil companies. It's hitting their contractors and suppliers, too. Small oil field businesses like Industrial Equipment Sales and Service in Williston, North Dakota, are bracing for that impact. They make and fix parts for oil field equipment. Rory Anderson is one of the company's owners. They've got about 50 employees, and they're trying to avoid laying anyone off. So they cut back hours and let their cleaning crew go. They also give advice to younger employees who haven't been through a boom and bust before.
You know, we tell them, you need to save as much money as you can, put it away, don't buy new things, and just be prepared because it is going to tighten up a long way.
One way companies prepare for a slowdown is by diversifying, not relying just on the oil field for all their business. That's what Bob Ayala is trying to do. He's the owner of Shale Oilfield Services. He leases a few trucks mounted with powerful hoses and vacuums. His company gets called to clean up oil and wastewater spills and blast holes into the ground for new pipelines. But that's not all they can do.
For the specific services that we offer, it is tied to the oil boom because everything is here. But we do a lot of utility work. We expose fiber optics. We do other work besides just drilling rigs and those types of oil boom services.
Ayala says demand for his business is pretty constant because even if drilling slows down, there will always be spills.
Going forward, even when the oil boom slows, there are still so many wells in North Dakota that have to be maintained. There's still ongoing fluid that's being moved, and that there still has to be support services, and we're one of them.
For some other businesses, demand is still high. Take this indoor RV park. Inside the oversized storage units, it's warm and quiet. You don't have to worry about your sewer and water pipes freezing. Owner Louis Bonneville says it's an obvious choice for the harsh North Dakota climate.
We do have a waiting list for our indoor units, and we have a few openings outside right now. Every day we get 3 or 4 calls for somebody to go inside, and most of the time it's because they're froze up from another RV park, and so they'd like to move in.
A few people have moved out recently, but Bonneville says that always happens this time of year.
I believe people are leaving because of the weather, not because of the price of oil. If it was the price of oil, we would have a mass exit. You know, we'd have companies, that are here that have 10 people here. All of a sudden one day we'd have 10 people leave and go home. And we haven't seen that yet. So I don't think it's the oil prices dictating our move out right now.
Williston, the town at the heart of the boom, usually feels slower this time of year. Cold weather puts a lot of the new construction and pipeline projects on hold, so there's far fewer heavy trucks rumbling through town than in the summer. But it's really hard to tell what's seasonal and what's due to low oil prices. Some say this is actually a pretty good time of year for prices to drop.
We'd rather not be drilling now anyways. We'd rather be slowing things down. We'd rather be waiting for better weather to come along, so it's If there was such a thing as the best time, it would be right now in the middle of the coldest part of winter.
The full effect of low prices probably won't be felt until spring, when the prairie thaws, temperatures rise, and activity would normally start back up. Until then, a lot of people up here are in a kind of hibernation, waiting to see what happens. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Emily Guerin in Williston, North Dakota.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Inside Energy is a project of Prairie Public in cooperation with public broadcasters in Colorado and Wyoming, funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. See more at insideenergy.org. And by the members of Prairie Public.